Hi guys, it's Clay Week, just about everybody's favorite art supply. We're going to learn different techniques for using our clay. So come on down to the board and let's see what we're going to make this year. Clay, we love clay. It's super messy and it's super fun and it's something that everybody seems to enjoy. So creating a mug out of clay is not as difficult as it sounds. To do this, we're going to create a nice flat piece of clay using a rolling pin, or in my case I've got a glue stick because my rolling pins are not handy. And I'm going to cut out a piece of clay that I'm going to use to build the project. You've probably seen artists on YouTube doing the potter's wheel, and that is a fantastic way of making mugs. It's a very quick way of making mugs, but we're not going to get to use those until later on into your art career here at Millersburg. So while you're thinking about the kind of forms that you could make for a mug that you want to drink your hot chocolate out of or your tea, then you can also realize that you could build them by hand. You don't have to use a potter's wheel to make a mug. And this is the one way we're going to do it. The first thing you have to pay attention to is you need to pay attention to the size rectangle that you create. The longer your rectangle, the wider the opening is going to be. The wider the rectangle, the taller your mug is going to be. That'll make sense in just a second. If I take this entire piece without cutting it or anything, and I stand it up on edge, you can see the longer the rectangle, the wider your mug is going to be. So if this is this long, then when I bend that around there, I've got that wide of a cup. If I cut a piece off of the end, and I would have to make it nice and straight, you'll see what happens. When I bend this around, you see how it gets smaller. So you have to have a long rectangle if you want a big mug. Let's press back on there just for a second. Now, the taller you want your mug, the wider this way the rectangle has to be. So if I want a nice tall mug, then I want a nice long rectangle. You see how it's longer here? It's wider at this point, and when I put it up here, you'll see how much taller it is on this side than it is on this side. Before you even start building it, you do need to cut it to make it nice and straight. And if you have a ruler handy, or if you have any other kind of straight edge tool, I would suggest that you use that because that's the way you're going to make sure that you have a nice, straight, even edge. The bottom cut should be parallel to the top cut, because if you have a triangle, it won't make a nice mug. You want to have a nice straight rectangle. So let's cut there. Just to tidy up the edges. We want to have two straight edges to connect them. All right, I'm going to give that one quick little roll just to get it just a little bit smaller. You don't want it too thick. I like to describe it as kind of between the size of a waffle and a pancake. So no thicker than a waffle, not one of those Belgian waffles that are huge, but just a regular old Eggo waffle, and the size of a pancake. If it's too thin, it just won't cooperate and it'll fall down. It's like working with a piece of paper. It'll stick, it'll not cooperate, and you'll just have a collapse, and then you'll be unhappy. It will also dry super, super fast. So the thinner you make it, the more quickly it's going to dry and make it not quite cooperative for you. All right, let's go back to elementary school when we were connecting two pieces of clay. You need to make what we called back then, we called it the zipper. Here at the middle school we call it slipping and scoring. That's its technical term. We are scoring the edges. We're creating the edges of our zipper so that when we put those two pieces together, we have a nice stiff connection. If you stick two straight pieces of clay together, they tend to shift and move around a little bit, and when it dries, the air will just kind of make it fall apart. So if you create that zipper, then that drying, when it dries, it will not fall apart because you've interlocked all the pieces. We also, at the elementary school, would just use a little bit of water. Here at the middle school, we use a little bit of water mixed with clay. That is called slip. And I'm going to use just a smidge of that on the edges. And then I will get these two connected. Now you do want to let gravity work in your favor, so instead of trying to work down at the side like this, where gravity would collapse your mug, you want to stand it up on end. I want to make sure that those two pieces of clay are very completely attached. So I'm going to pinch them together. I'm going to push clay from one end to the other. I'm going to smooth out that seam so I don't see a little bit of it either on the inside or on the outside. And to do that, you want to make sure that it's nice and smooth and connected, of course, because we don't want our hot chocolate leaking out all over your pants while you're trying to drink it. So there, now I have a cute little beginning of a mug. Now, of course, it still has no bottom. So how do you make a bottom? Well, you do that pretty much the exact same way. We're going to roll out a nice piece of clay. And then we're going to cut a circle. Make sure that you're measuring when you cut, because there's nothing worse than cutting and it's not the right size. Always measure twice and cut once. That's a good woodworking term as well. So I'm going to take my mug and I'm going to sit it down here on my piece of clay. And then I'm going to just trim around the edge. And you can use whatever you have handy to trim around the edge. I'm going to use a pencil this time. And we'll remove that extra. And now I have a nice base for my mug. And of course I'm going to do the same trick. We're going to do the same slipping and scoring trick. Really, the best and most important tool that you ever use is this slipping and scoring trick, because it will make sure that you get these things connected and we don't have to worry about gaps or seams or falling apart projects. If you had a piece fall apart in the elementary school, I can pretty much guarantee it's because you forgot to do this zipper trick. That kind of happens all the time. When you add your slip or your water, you don't want to smooth out your creases, those little scratch marks that you just made. You just want to make them wet, and that will kind of help them stick together a little easier. And then we'll attach them in the same way. I'll try to smooth that clay all together. Try to make sure there's no seam showing inside and out. And then I'll have a nice, lovely mug. See how quick that was? Nice hand-built mug. Last up is your handle, and there are many different ways to make a handle. The most simple way to make a handle is to go back to your Play-Doh making days, where you just made a nice little coil snake. I'm going to make one that's a little wider on one end than the other. I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to press that down just gently. If you look at any of the mugs that you can buy at the store, you will see a mug that usually has a bit of a hefty handle. It's going to weigh a little bit. You don't want to have something so fragile and thin that you won't be able to pick up your mug. I would suggest that you do not try to pick it up before it has been fired. Try to identify where that seam was, where you put the two pieces together, and I believe mine might have been right here, because I don't want to attach the mug on that seam. That is, or the handle on that seam. That's still a fragile spot, so you want to add the handle to the absolute opposite side of where your two attachment points were. If I take this, I can bend it around to look a little bit like an ear, and then I can attach it to the side to make an interesting mug. Your handle can change shape. You know, you can make it look a little bit like a snake and coil around a bit, or you can even have it attached this way. Whatever you find that is the most interesting. Just remember that you do want to make sure you can get at least 2 or 3 fingers inside that handle. If you make it too small and narrow and you try to pick it up with one finger, it really doesn't stay very sturdy, and you'll end up tipping over the contents of the mug onto yourself. So get it so that you can get at least 2 fingers in there. It will shrink a little in the firing, but you should be able to tell if you're going to be able to put fingers in there before it gets completely fired. You can tell if it's big enough or not. Slipping and scoring again, and we'll create that attachment. I'm going to lay mine down on the side just so you can see what's happening. Smooth that in place really well so you don't have to worry about that mug popping off on you. And there you have a completed mug. Hand-built, completed mug. All right, the last thing we want to talk about is, let's talk about the surface textures of your project. There's nothing wrong with plain, smooth clay, but it is plain and smooth. And so sometimes you maybe have decided that you want to have something a little bit more interesting to look at on the side of your container. And there are many different ways that we can make that a little bit more interesting to look at. I can just use the rolling tool that I'm using right now. And if you can see what's happening when I roll against the clay with the end of this tool, I get some interesting little designs going on. Or I could maybe press into the clay to make some kind of decoration. You can do this with just about any tool that you have handy. You can always use a pencil. and draw your design also. Look around for some things in your house that might make some interesting surface decoration. Now here at school we have these texture plates, and this is a piece of plastic with some hot glue stretched back across it, and this is actually a texture plate of some kind of animal print or flowers. I don't really know what that is, but you can use these in the same way. You can just press them down into the clay, and then you have some interesting design that shows up. This is actually a piece of a McDonald's takeout container. My daughter loves the pancakes, so you've got this nice little surface area on here, and you can press that into the clay. In either direction, you can either press it in so that you end up with like golf ball like dimples, or you can do the reverse so that you're going to end up with these little pieces that stick up in the air. Also some interesting surface. And then of course if I wanted to use this, I could go back in and I would cut out my design, or I would create the slab and I would use the piece that has the design on it to make the rest of my container. Last part, always take a pencil, put your name on the bottom. Please do not just use your initials. You're going to need to use your entire first name and maybe a last initial.